Good evening and welcome to the Strand. I'm Christina Foxley, Director of Events, and I'm pleased to welcome film critics Richard Schickel and Richard Corliss, here to discuss Schickel's new book, Conversations with Scorsese. Conversations with Scorsese chronicles the life of one of the most iconic and celebrated filmmakers of our time, Martin Scorsese. Ron Howard confessed that this book offers the reader all the pleasures of slyly eavesdropping on a private but riveting and entertaining conversation going on at the next table. Richard Schickel is a film critic, documentary filmmaker, and movie historian. He has written 37 books, has held a Guggenheim Fellowship, and has been recognized with numerous awards for his contributions to film history. A critic for Life and Time magazines for 43 years, he now reviews movies at truthdig.com. Joining Mr. Schickel tonight is Richard Corliss, a fellow film critic for Time magazine and author of 3 books. Although they do not always agree on their critiques of various films, Mr. Schickel and Mr. Corliss share in their admiration of Scorsese and their devotion to the film industry. Following their discussion, Mr. Schickel and Mr. Corliss will answer your questions, and then Mr. Schickel will sign copies of his books for you, which you can purchase downstairs on your way out of the store. Please join me in welcoming Richard Corliss and Richard Schickel to the Strand.
Over to you.
And we share in my admiration for you.
Well, thank you.
Schickel was approaching middle age when I joined Time in 1980.
Oh, come on.
Well, I was approaching middle age.
For sure.
Forever young. And I had profited from reading his books for many years, and of course his criticism in Life and Time. I think the thing I will be most envious of, considering all the filmmakers he has illuminated in prose and interviewed on film, was that in 1958 he received a letter from Vladimir Nabokov. It must have been for your 5th birthday.
I had reviewed Lolita before it was published in the United States, and a girlfriend brought it. Huh?
You're going to have to come in here.
Oh, okay. The thing needs Viagra.
I think I have wieners.
I had a girlfriend had brought Lolita back from her vacation in Paris, and I read it and liked it and wrote a review of it for a magazine long gone called The Reporter. And he got in touch with me. He wrote me a letter, and I wrote a letter, and you know, it was just one of those. That was my sole contact with Nabokov, but you know, it got in his collected letters. There's that to be said about it.
Christine, in her introduction, used the word iconic to refer to Marty Scorsese. He probably began as being iconoclastic, and I wonder whether an icon is someone who's broken so many icons in his youth that he becomes a kind of film statesman.
Yeah, well, Marty is getting kind of statesman-like in his late years now, don't you think? I mean, but it is. I found with this book, there's a lot more in the book. People think they know Marty, you know, because he's widely, you know, he's on practically every DVD they put out, you know, and he's on television, and he is a sort of, in some ways, sort of senior statesman of the movies at this point. But I just think there is, and there have been other books about it. There actually have been other Q&A books about him. But I think we met kind of more or less as equals. I mean, you know, I'm not some associate professor of film at, you know, Podunk U with, you know, I mean, we know each other. We know each other through the films that we share as, you know, appreciators and all that stuff. So I think, you know, a lot of kind of good stuff came out of those conversations, at least stuff that was new to me in a lot of respects. It was very pleasurable to do. We tended to do them kind of from 8 o'clock at night till kind of 1 in the morning.
That's lunch for Marty.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. You know, there's all this. Marty was going to be a priest kind of thing, you know, and he said, you know, I couldn't. I mean, he said, you know, I'm not very good in the morning. So, you know, 6 o'clock mass as an older boy wasn't working out really well for him. But there is all that background, all the streets not too far from here where he grew up. And I found that maybe, to me, the most fascinating part of, you know, the process of interviewing. I mean, just a lot of interesting material came up there. You know, kind of, you know, he's an asthmatic little kid. He's, as a result of that illness, he's not really allowed to participate in the activities of the other kids of his age. So he becomes kind of, I accused him of being, you know, like the little boy in Kundun. You know, he's sort of back up on, in his case, a balcony or a rooftop, and kind of observing this life going on beneath him. And that was, you know, he sort of resisted that, but then he kind of admitted that, yeah, that was the kind of life he had, because he couldn't really be a full-scale participant. And the main pleasure of his life, of course, was going to the movies, first with his father, and then, you know, with his brothers and other kids in the neighborhood and all that stuff. And I think there was something, you know, ritualistic about it, the movies, you know, something that would appeal to a little Catholic boy who was also smitten by, you know, the rituals of the church and so forth. So it was a kind of a natural thing, you know, first, you know, going to the movies, then going to NYU, then starting to make movies. I don't know, looking back, you know, what else he might have become. I mean, I don't fancy him as a lawyer or, you know, something like that.
He said in his documentary, Mi Viaggio in Italia, his tribute to Italian films, that the first films he fell in love with were Italian language films shown on probably Channel 9 here.
Yeah, that's right.
Late 30s, early 40s films like, it's not the Iron Cross, but I'm close.
Yeah, well, but certainly the movies of Italian neorealism that kind of got on those channels when he was a kid growing up. And
I was thinking that the Italian films of the, we'll say, fascist period, were more had the kind of spectacle that he also got in church in Little Italy.
Oh, I think so. Yeah, definitely that. It was like he didn't quite. He thought he might be an English teacher or something like that, and then somehow he got in touch with the NYU catalog of the film school, and there was this guy there who was, you know, an impassioned film person.
Is that Haig Manoogian?
Yeah, Haig Manoogian. Yeah, and he sort of took Marty in and was a mentor, and he produced actually some of his first films. And I mean, he was, by the time he graduated from NYU, he was really kind of a full-scale filmmaker. I mean, he knew all the things you had to do technically and so forth to make a movie. Well, not all of them, but he was well on the way. And I mean, it is kind of a natural growth, I think, you know, this kid. I mean, it just, you know, almost there seems to me in talking to him about him, there came a point when, let's say, he might have been 18, when I don't think he had any choice in the matter. You know, that's what he was going to be.
You must have looked at his early films, the Big Shave, for example.
Big Shave, yeah.
Which was shot in the apartment of a friend of mine.
Was it really?
Must have been 66 or so.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Are those on DVD?
Yeah, I think they are. But pretty obscure DVDs. I mean, you're not going to just get them in Blockbuster.
He was coming into film. Who's That Knocking at My Door, which I believe he wanted to call J.R., the name of the character played by Harvey Keitel. Yeah. I think might have been made in '67, finally released in '69.
Sounds right.
Yeah. By an exploitation company, Michigan, I think. Wasn't that right?
That's correct. Yeah. And You know, I mean, he doesn't like that movie much, but I kind of do like that movie. I mean, you know, it has good stuff in it, you know, and it's really an authentic look at the world he comes out of, and so that's. I wish he liked it more. John Cassavetes liked that movie. John and I guess, are the only two people who.
No, a lot of people do, but Cassavetes, now that you mention him, is a crucial touchstone for Scorsese.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And when Marty went to the West Coast, I think he actually lived at John and Jenna's house, and he did work for him. He did some editing, he did some sound work, stuff like that. And John was always the one encouraging him. You know, I mean, Marty did Boxcar Bertha, and that almost put a breach in the relationship with John. But
got to make a living.
Yeah.
I mean,
also, I kind of like Boxcar Bertha.
But it's interesting that his first two features were for William Mishkin and Roger Corman on the exploitation side.
Yeah.
And
then they had to go and shoot the nude scene with,
right,
you know, in Holland, I think it was, you know, with Harvey. There's stills of that. Harvey's just looking so happy.
It's the first time Harvey got to be the star of a movie, I was going to say. But there's the exploitation side, which also was the back alley by which he could become a feature filmmaker, and there was the art film side of all the pictures he'd been ingesting, and I guess the Cassavetes side. To me, Cassavetes' influence on him is in breaking down the well-made script or even the well-made scene, and allowing the characters, the actors, to repeat what they're saying, repeat it, and possibly either to avoid or not be able to find a standard narrative or climax.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, John was, you know, John was really, in my mind at least, and back in those days, I knew John, you know, reasonably well, and he was really much more of a kind of an actor's director. I mean, the way John would set up those movies, they were kind of indulgences in a way for his actors, and you know, they would do, you know, 35 takes of something, and he'd go on forever with that, and so I think Marty is much less inclined in that direction, and I think he always was less inclined in that direction. But you know, the thing Marty says about, which is I think really interesting, is that if he hadn't done Boxcar Bertha, he would never have been able to do Mean Streets. The reason being that he learned everything you could learn about making movies on the cheap by doing Boxcar Bertha, and you know, Roger Corman really taught him a lot about how to do that, how to get your best work. For example, they're down and there's a lot to do with trains in that movie, and and Roger said, "Do the trains, do them first." Well, why? Because that's the hardest thing you got to shoot. So you want to get that out of the way, because you know the train has to. You do the shot, and then the train has to back up the track, and then you have to do it over again. So it wasn't just that kind of thing. It was really learning how to do that on the cheap. And one of the things that's interesting to me about what?
I don't think it's on.
It's on. I mean, we're all pretty close here. I mean, okay. What was I saying?
What he learned by shooting the train sequences in Boxcar Bertha.
Yeah, they just needed to turn it up a little bit. Most of that movie, oddly enough, was actually shot in Los Angeles. They only did 6 days in New York for this, you know, sort of quintessential New York movie.